August 27th, 2012, Harlem, New York. A horse-drawn carriage rolls slowly down Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard. No rush, no sirens, just the clop of hooves on asphalt and a crowd that stretches back 3 city blocks. Inside that carriage, an ornate casket. Inside that casket, a man in an impeccable suit. He left the way he lived, on his own terms, in style. Lil' Kim was there. Cameron was there. Music executives, street legends, old school OGs who hadn't left Harlem in decades, they were all there. And then he walked in. Sean Combs, Puff Daddy, Diddy, whatever name he was going by that week. He stood at the microphone. He said a few words. He called this man his uncle. He said this man had saved his life. Then he left, got into his car, and according to people who were there, he never looked back. Here's what Diddy didn't say at that funeral. He didn't say that Eric Von Zip Martin had been quietly erased from his public story for years. His name appeared nowhere on any Wikipedia page, any official biography, or any press release from Bad Boy Entertainment. He didn't say that years before that funeral, LAPD detectives had flown to New York specifically to build a case connecting this man to the most famous unsolved murder in hip-hop history. He didn't say that, according to a Southside Crips shot caller who would later be indicted for murder, Von Zip Martin may have supplied the weapon that killed Tupac Shakur. And he definitely didn't say the part that made investigators' blood run cold. Von Zip was present at both crime scenes. The night Tupac got shot in Vegas, Von Zip was there. The night Biggie got killed in Los Angeles, Von Zip was there. 2 of the greatest rappers who ever lived. 2 of the most infamous murders in American music history. One man, present at both, and he died of cancer in 2012. His secrets, according to someone who knew him well, died with him. This is the story of a man who ran Harlem for decades, who moved between the streets and the suites like he was born for both, who sat at the table with Bumpy Johnson, Frank Lucas, Mike Tyson, Diddy, and Biggie, and made sure every deal got done. The man they called Von Zip. The man who may have held a piece of the biggest secret in hip-hop. The man nobody was supposed to know about. You have to understand Harlem in the 1960s to understand Von Zip. 118th Street between 8th Avenue and St. Nicholas. That is where Eric Martin was born. That is where he grew up. And for a black kid in Harlem in that era, the street was not just an address. It was a classroom. Harlem in the 1960s was the epicenter of Black America. The music, the culture, the politics. Malcolm X was preaching blocks away. The Apollo was the church of rhythm and blues. And underneath all of it, running parallel to that beauty, was an economy that the rest of America refused to see. Numbers running, policy rackets, and by the time young Eric Martin had eyes to see it, the heroin trade. The man who ran that world was not a faceless corporation. He had a name, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the godfather of Harlem. The man who had faced down the Italian mob in the 1930s, brokered peace with Lucky Luciano, and kept Harlem's black underground economy out of white hands for 4 decades. Bumpy died in 1968 of a heart attack. He collapsed at Wells Restaurant, a cup of coffee in his hand and a chicken leg on the plate in front of him. The throne was empty. What happened next would define the next 30 years of Harlem's underworld. Frank Lucas moved in, claiming Bumpy's crown, building his blue magic empire, importing heroin directly from Southeast Asia, and putting Harlem on a different kind of map. And somewhere in that chaos, in that power vacuum, a young man from 118th Street was watching, learning, positioning. Eric Martin, who the streets would come to call Von Zip, understood something that most of the men around him did not. Power was not just about who moved the most product. Power was about who you knew. And Von Zip decided to know everybody. Call it a gift. Call it survival instinct. Call it genius. Whatever you call it, Von Zip had an ability that very few men in his world possessed. He could sit down with anyone. It did not matter if you were a street soldier from Harlem or a record executive from Midtown. It did not matter if you ran a Crip set in Compton or an Italian social club in Brooklyn. Von Zip moved through all of those worlds with the same ease, the same mink coat, the same pork pie hat, the same steady eyes that told you he was not scared of you, and he did not need anything from you that he could not get somewhere else. By the 1970s, he had built what investigators would later describe as a supply network that stretched from coast to coast. On the West Coast, the South Side Crips, based out of Compton, California, were one of the most powerful and dangerous street organizations in Los Angeles history. They moved product, they had muscle, and they needed markets on the East Coast. Von Zip gave them Harlem. According to multiple sources, including law enforcement reports, Zip operated a supply relationship with the South Side Crips for close to a decade. They sent supply west to east. He handled distribution. It was business, and it was very, very profitable. But here is what separated Von Zip from every other distributor in Harlem. He understood that the real power was not in the product. The real power was in the relationship. Anyone can move supply. Not everyone can sit at the same table with Frank Lucas, then walk across the street and have a conversation with someone Frank Lucas would never speak to. Not everyone can be the man in the middle. Von Zip was the man in the middle. And in the world he operated in, that was the most dangerous, most powerful, most lucrative position you could hold. By the 1980s, something was changing in Harlem. The music was changing too. A new sound was coming up out of the South Bronx and making its way downtown. Hip-hop, rap music. A generation of young black men and women had grown up watching the old Kingpins, the Bumpys, the Lucases, the Bobs and the Flashes, and decided to turn that lifestyle into art. Von Zip saw it coming before most people in his world did. He started moving, not away from the streets, but alongside something new. He owned clubs, Harlem Lounge, and later Zip Code, a nightclub on Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard that became one of the most important rooms in New York, not just because of the music they played, but because of who came through the door. Everybody came to Zip Code. Street legends, music executives, athletes, politicians, and rappers who were about to become superstars. And through those doors, Von Zip became the bridge between two worlds most people thought were separate. They were not separate. They never were. There was a young music executive making noise in New York in the early 1990s, building a record label, hustling his way into boardrooms and studio sessions. His name was Sean Combs, and Sean Combs did not have the connections he needed, not yet. Von Zip had them all. Nobody in the public record can pinpoint the exact moment these two men met. But what is documented is the relationship that followed. According to multiple sources who knew both men, Von Zip became Uncle Zip to Sean Combs, advisor, protector, connector. Diddy would later stand at his funeral and say that Von Zip had saved his life. He never elaborated on what that meant. But the people who were in those rooms in the early 1990s, they knew. Let's talk about how wide that circle really was. Not as rumor, as documented fact. Von Zip Martin was the godfather to Christopher Wallace's son, the son of the man the world knew as the notorious B.I.G. This wasn't an honorary title. In Black American tradition, The godfather is the man you trust, above all others, to raise your child if you cannot. Biggie trusted Von Zip with his son's future. Von Zip was also the godfather to one of Diddy's children, two of the biggest names in hip-hop history, and both of them chose the same Harlem street legend to stand as godfather to their sons. That's not coincidence. That's a level of trust that doesn't happen by accident. He managed Mike Tyson, the most feared boxer on the planet, in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The man who would bite off another man's ear in the ring and call it Tuesday. One of the people in Tyson's corner helping navigate the chaos of his career was Von Zip Martin. He co-executive produced the soundtrack for Exit Wounds, the 2001 film starring Steven Seagal and DMX. His name is in the credits. He worked alongside Jimmy Henchman, who ran Czar Entertainment, and Barry Hankerson, who ran Blackground Records. His nightclub hosted the book release party for Mamie Johnson, Bumpy Johnson's 93-year-old widow, when she published her memoir, Harlem Godfather, in 2008. Think about that. The widow of the original godfather of Harlem chose Von Zip's room for her book party. That's lineage. That's a passing of the torch. According to a journalist who knew him personally and spent nearly a decade interviewing him, Von Zip drove a bulletproof Mercedes. He maintained offices on both coasts. He moved effortlessly between entertainment and underworld circles in a way that very few men in American history have ever managed. He was, in the words of that journalist, following in the footsteps of his mentor, Bumpy Johnson. Semi-ruling Harlem's underworld on and off for decades. 1993, RT5, the East-West fault line. The rap game is exploding, and underneath the music there's a war building. Bad Boy Entertainment on the East Coast, Death Row Records on the West Coast, Diddy and Biggie on one side, Suge Knight and Tupac on the other. What starts as tension in lyrics becomes something harder and more real with every passing month. By 1995, it's not just beef, it's dangerous. Diddy needed security on the West Coast. He needed muscle he could trust in a city where he had enemies. According to investigators who would spend years trying to piece this together, Von Zip made a call. He had a relationship with the Southside Crips that went back nearly a decade. He knew who to call. He knew Keefe D, Dwayne Davis, a shot caller in the Southside Crips who had been moving product for Zip for years. According to investigator Greg Kading, who worked the Tupac and Biggie murder cases for the LAPD, the introduction between Diddy and the Southside Crips came through Von Zip Martin. The Crips began providing security for Bad Boy on the West Coast. It was a business arrangement at first, but in that world, business arrangements between people with guns have a way of becoming something more complicated. The Mike Tyson fight. Tyson versus Selden. MGM Grand, Las Vegas, Nevada. September 7th, 1996. Everybody was there. Suge Knight and Tupac were there. The Southside Crips were there. They flew in specifically for the fight. Von Zip Martin was there. He was with Foxy Brown at the MGM Grand that night. The same night, in that same building, one of Suge Knight's associates spotted Orlando Anderson in the lobby. Anderson was Southside Crips. Earlier that year, his crew had tried to rob a Death Row affiliate at a mall in Lakewood. Suge's people had not forgotten. A brawl broke out in the lobby. Tupac and Suge's crew jumped in. Anderson got beaten down on camera. The Crips crew, who according to investigators had come to Vegas unarmed, now had a problem. They needed a weapon. According to the murder rap documentary, based on LAPD Detective Greg Kading's investigation and Keefe D's own account, Von Zip Martin provided the weapon that night. Let me be precise here because precision matters. This is an allegation. It comes from Keefe D, who has since partially recanted his statements and from a documentary based on that testimony. Von Zip was never charged. He was never indicted. He is not alive to respond. But here is what is not disputed. Von Zip Martin was present at the MGM Grand the night Tupac was shot. A few hours after that brawl, as Tupac and Suge Knight drove away from a post-fight event, a white BMW pulled alongside their car. Shots were fired. Tupac Shakur died 6 days later. And the man who investigators would spend years connecting to the weapon used in that murder was standing in that building when the night began. 6 months later, on March 9, 1997, in Los Angeles, Biggie Smalls, Christopher Wallace, had just performed at the Soul Train Music Awards. He was leaving a party at the Peterson Automotive Museum on Wilshire Boulevard. At the intersection of Wilshire and Fairfax, a dark-colored Chevrolet Impala pulled alongside his SUV. Shots were fired. Biggie was struck 4 times. He was pronounced dead at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at 1:15 a.m. Von Zip was there. He was with Keyshawn Johnson, the NFL wide receiver, on Fairfax Avenue that night, blocks away in the vicinity when the most famous unsolved murder in hip-hop history happened. 2 nights, 2 murders, 2 of the greatest rappers who ever lived, one man present at both. That is not an accusation. That is a documented fact that investigators could not explain away. The LAPD noticed. 2009, 13 years after Tupac's murder. LAPD detectives were still working the case. Keefe D had been arrested on drug trafficking charges, and he had begun cooperating with investigators, offering information in exchange for consideration. What he told them was explosive. He said that Diddy had offered a $1 million bounty to kill Suge Knight and Tupac. He said $500,000 went to Von Zip Martin after Tupac's murder was carried out. Investigators needed to corroborate. They could not just take the word of a man trying to trade information for leniency. So they set up a sting. Keefe D flew to New York with LAPD detectives. The target was 2 people, Diddy and Von Zip Martin. They approached Von Zip outside his own nightclub, Zip Code, on Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard in the heart of Harlem. Keefe D asked him about product, testing the waters, trying to get a conversation started that investigators could use. Von Zip felt it. Something was off. He knew it in his gut, the way you know things when you have survived in that world for 40 years. He smiled. He was polite, and he never followed up. The sting produced nothing. Von Zip walked back inside his club, back to his world, and the Los Angeles Police Department went home with empty hands. 3 years later, cancer took what the police could not. Here's a question worth sitting with. Why doesn't anyone know this man's name? Not the way they know Bumpy Johnson, not the way they know Frank Lucas or Nicky Barnes, not the way they know the names Diddy put on albums and posters and magazine covers. Von Zip Martin spent 40 years at the center of Harlem's underworld. He was present at some of the most important events in both street history and music history. He was trusted by men who trusted nobody. He was godfather to children whose parents became cultural icons. And when you search his name, almost nothing, not because he wasn't important, because he was erased. The same journalist who spent a decade visiting him at Zip Code recalled asking Diddy's team a dozen questions about the relationship between the 2 men, about Von Zip's role in Bad Boy Entertainment, about what Uncle Zip had actually done for Sean Combs. Diddy's spokesperson sent back one sentence: no comment. That was the sound of a powerful man with something to protect. Von Zip himself seemed to understand the irony. Sitting in his own club, over scotch, he once told that journalist something that stayed with him. He pointed to the 3,000 miles between New York and California. He said that journalist had made that trip to see him, and he said Puffy had never once walked through his door. He said it quietly, without anger, just a man taking stock of what loyalty actually meant in a world where loyalty was supposed to be everything. August 27, 2012. Von Zip Martin died of cancer. He was somewhere in his late 60s, and Harlem stopped. They dressed him in an impeccable suit. They put him in an ornate casket. They hitched that casket to a horse-drawn carriage, and they walked it through the streets of Harlem, past the clubs he'd owned, past the corners where he'd come up, past the building on 118th Street where it all started. Lil' Kim was there. Cameron was there. And then Diddy walked in, the man who had scrubbed Von Zip's name from every public record, who had never visited the club, who had moved on and up and left this Harlem OG behind like an inconvenient chapter in a story he'd rather not tell. He said some words. He called him Uncle. He said Von Zip saved his life. He didn't explain how. He didn't have to. The people in that room, the real ones, the ones who'd been there from the beginning, they already knew. Someone who watched it all unfold, someone who had known both men for years, summed it up afterward in a single sentence. His secrets die with him. What does it mean to be the most powerful man in the room and also the most invisible? Von Zip Martin spent his life at the intersection of everything. He was the last link in a chain that ran from Bumpy Johnson's Harlem to Frank Lucas's Empire, to the first generation of hip-hop, to the most watched murder trial of the 2020s. Keith D., whose given name is Dwayne Davis, was arrested in September 2023. He was indicted for the first-degree murder of Tupac Shakur, 27 years after the fact. His name was spoken in courtrooms, in depositions, in headlines around the world. And almost every time his name came up, another name appeared alongside it, Von Zippy, the man who introduced Keith D. to Diddy, the man who allegedly ran product between the Southside Crips and Harlem for nearly a decade, the man who investigators believed supplied the weapon, the man who was in that building, the man who was on that street, the man who felt the sting coming and walked back inside his own club and lived free until cancer found him. There is a version of American history, the official version, the one with clean timelines and verified facts and the names that made it into movies, that does not include Von Zip Martin. And then there is the actual history, the one that happened in rooms where no cameras were allowed, in clubs that closed at 4 a.m., in conversations that were never recorded, and deals that were never signed. That history is full of men like Eric Martin, men who made everything possible and appeared in none of the credits. Here is what I want to leave you with. Two of the greatest hip-hop artists who ever lived are dead. Tupac Shakur. Christopher Wallace, gone before 30. For decades, no one was held accountable. Then in 2023, a 60-year-old man named Dwayne Davis was arrested in Henderson, Nevada. They found documents and evidence in his house. He was charged with murder. And in the legal filings that followed, the name Von Zip Martin appeared again and again. Zip was gone by then. He died 11 years before that arrest. The LAPD confirmed publicly that Diddy was never considered a suspect in Tupac's murder. Keith D. has recanted portions of his story. The full truth of what happened in Las Vegas in September 1996 may never be completely known, but this much is documented. There was a man who ran Harlem for 40 years, who built a supply network from coast to coast, who was trusted above all men by two of the most iconic figures in music history, who moved through the streets and the suites without leaving fingerprints, who felt a federal sting coming and walked away clean, who died before anyone could make him answer. His name was Eric Von Zip Martin. He was born on 118th Street between 8th Avenue and St. Nicholas in Harlem, New York. And if you ask some people in that city, the real ones, the ones who were there, they will tell you something that makes the whole story land differently. They will tell you that Von Zip was not just following in Bumpy Johnson's footsteps. He was the next Bumpy. The last of a line that started before most of us were born and ended in an ornate casket rolling through the streets of Harlem on a horse-drawn carriage, while the man who owed him the most stood at a microphone and said as little as possible, "Rest in power to the ones who built it all and got none of the credit." And if you're new here, subscribe. There are 1,000 stories in this city that nobody's told yet. This was one of them.